Can a sub 200 bass really compete against the big boys? Today we're going to find out on Addicted to Gear. So I have a huge announcement for all you Addicted to Gear fans. I'm going 100% bass content from now on. I know you're going to be super happy with that, and I'm looking forward to it. Gotcha. Just kidding. I'm a guitarist at heart, but I do enjoy playing bass from time to time, so I figured it would be nice to actually do a review of a bass and just give you my opinion on these sub $200 basses that you can get nowadays on Amazon and other places as well. This is a bass made by Donner and it's under 200 bucks, $179.99, and that's Canadian. What do you get for $179? You can't even buy a pedal for that amount of money. And this bass comes finished. You get a nice lead with it, you get a strap with it, you even get an adjustment Allen key with it, all for 179 bucks. Now, I'll be 100% honest with you guys. When I got this bass, I figured I would be disappointed and I would have to kind of tear it apart in the review, but I'm eating my hat here because it's amazing. I really like this bass, and I'm not just saying that, guys. I tried to find the flaw and I couldn't. I looked at the paint, I looked at the wood, I looked at the frets, I looked at the nut, all the typical things that I normally look at when I get a new guitar, and I tried to find faults with it and I could not, and especially at this price point I was actually blown away. So I want to talk about this bass and go into micro detail. I'm going to lay it out on my table and I'm going to show you all the intricate parts that make up a good instrument. And I'm gonna bet you some money to try and find a defect. When I got this bass, it was left on my doorstep by the UPS guy. I don't know why they do that, but it's winter here and it was snowing and cold, and he left it there leaning against my wall. The box was damaged, so I figured, oh my God, who knows what the hell I'm gonna find inside this box when I bring it inside. I brought it in, I took it out of the box and the case, and it was so cold I was getting condensation all over the bass, and I figured, oh boy, the neck is gonna be, you know, warped, or it's gonna react with the cold and then the heat. So I gave it a couple hours to normalize, and lo and behold, when I played it, the bass sounded great. It sounded punchy. I was playing it and I was comparing it to the bass that I already have. It's another name, I don't want to mention it, but it's more of a little bit more of an expensive bass, and it was holding its own. The pickups on this thing are very punchy. The knobs work well. The sweep on the knobs are super nice. The input jack holds the jack solidly. There's no rattling or anything like that. And the hardware. The hardware is made of chromed metal. I don't know if it's completely chrome, probably not, but at least the finish on this thing is really nice in terms of the bridge, the knobs, and the tuning keys here. And very similar to what you would see on an F-style bass. The wood on the neck, super nice, very rich and deep. It looks, to me anyways, like rosewood. It might be another species of rosewood, I'm not quite sure, but it really looks super nice. And I'll give you a little bit of a close-up of the body so that you can see the way it looks. I haven't even taken the plastic off the pick guard yet because I didn't want to scratch it. You can see the back of the body has a nice tummy tuck to it. The back of the neck is maple. There's no skunk stripe on it. The fretboard, as I mentioned, is like a rosewood. And honestly, very solidly put together instrument. Now, when I play a bass, obviously, I'm not a bassist per se. I dabble in bass, so I'm not a know-it-all when it comes to all the different types of basses. But I have played bass before. I have played guitar for a long time, and I know what to look for in an instrument. I know what sounds good. I know when the bridge sucks, or when the tuning keys suck, or when the nut is not good. And in this particular case, I looked at all of those aspects and was unable to find any issues. Honestly, guys, great value for your money. I'm gonna plug it in, just pluck a few chords or a few notes, and let you hear it. Again, I'm not a bass player, so bear with me, but I just want you to hear what it sounds like. The pickups on this thing are very punchy, very rich and deep. I don't intend on swapping them out at all. I think they do the job quite well. They're not active pickups, they're passive pickups, and they perform extremely well. So we're going to start off with things totally on the bright side of the tone knob using a pick. Now let's take it all the way to dial off all the highs. And now let's put it in the middle, somewhere in the middle. I'm going to play it now with a pick and some palm muting. You can hear a bit of the vibration in the room, but you have to disregard that because there's a lot of low end coming from this bass. It's pretty nice sounding. Now that was using the treble control all the way on the bleeding off all the lows. So let's give it something in between now. Let's talk a little bit about the pickups on this bass. Now these pickups are pretty standard type pickups for any bass, and you see them very often on Fender style basses, Squier basses, and a lot of other models. I was actually very surprised at how punchy these pickups sound. I compared them to another bass that I have in my possession, and I feel that one is actually an active bass. This is not an active bass, which means it does not require a battery, but the pickups are quite punchy, and I really enjoyed the sound that I was getting out of these pickups. I have no intentions of actually switching out these pickups. There's no real need to do so, in my opinion. The output jack here works very nicely. It holds the jack in place quite nicely, very securely. There was no rattling or shaking or any kind of static that I can tell. So it seems to be well made as well. So let's talk about the knobs on this bass. There's two knobs. One is volume, the other is treble, and they work very nicely. They have a nice feel to them. They don't feel like they're shaky in any way. They have a nice smooth feel to them. The hardware, from what I can tell, also looks quite nice. It's a nice chrome knobs on this bass, which I feel adds to the nice look of it. I haven't taken the opportunity to remove the pickguard to look at what type of pots are in there, but until I have problems with them, they'll stay on. I find that the treble knob works nicely. It doesn't cut off the highs extremely aggressively, but it gives you enough range so that you're able to get that sound dialed in the way you want it to be. Oftentimes on less expensive instruments, you'll see that there's a gap along this line. This part of the neck might not be cut and sanded as smoothly as it should be. Some of the frets along this area might be overlooked, but in this particular bass, everything really fits super nicely. I'll take a nicer shot of this area here so you can see that there's absolutely no gap there. So here you can see how tightly the neck and body are fit together on this side. There's absolutely no gap. You can't actually fit any, even the thinnest type of paper in there, which shows me that the attention to detail on this particular bass is quite good. As you can see with the frets as well, there's no extending frets here. I felt the neck up and down, and it's winter and actually quite dry right now, so I would expect some fret sprout. But in this case, the fret is actually very, very nice and not requiring any kind of sanding at all. So here's a shot of the opposite end of the neck here, and you can see that it's the same situation on both sides. There's no big ugly gap or anything like that. You can see that the end of the fretboard here is sanded quite nicely, rounded off very evenly, and there's no ugly sand spots that they've missed or anything like that. So extremely high attention to detail from what I can tell on this particular bass. So here you can see another view of the end of the fretboard, and one thing that I always like to look at is how straight the neck is in relationship to the strings. And as you can see here, if the focus on my camera doesn't fade out a little bit here, but you can see that the strings are very, very straight, and also the attention to detail in terms of the positioning of the fret markers here. You can see how they're aligned with the center two strings very, very evenly, and also the 12 fret markers are aligned with the strings, so they're right in between. There's no sloppiness whatsoever there. So the other area that usually lacks attention on lower end instruments is the nut. The way the nut is cut, the material of the nut, the finishing of the nut in terms of its height and whatever other aspects that need to be set up on a normal instrument setup sometimes get overlooked. Now in this bass, I can see that the nut and the strings are cut quite nicely. I don't see any major issues. The height is good. The attention to detail along the ends is good. You can see that the nut was filed properly, that the strings stick out about halfway, which they should normally do, except for the low E string, which can be adjusted if we need to, but otherwise the nut seems to be quite nicely set up. I'm trying to give you as many close-up shots as I can because you don't normally see this kind of detail when you're looking at eBay descriptions or other types of descriptions. So I want you to have a look and see. I haven't cleaned the bass at all, so you can see how tight the nut fits into the slot. You can see a little bit of wood tear out there, but it's very, very minimal. And you can see the height and the settings of how the nut was actually set up in terms of the action. If we look over at the first fret here and look at it pretty closely, it clears the first fret quite nicely. I can try and show you how you can see how high the string is. It's not actually high at all. It clears. It could be a slightly lower, but then you risk having some buzzing. And that is a question of how much clearance you normally like depending on how you play. So I want to talk a little bit about the frets and the fret markers on this bass, because that's another area where you'll always see a little bit of lack of attention when it comes to more inexpensive instruments. And in this case, there's absolutely no fret sprout. The markers on the side of the neck are nicely centered, and you could normally see on cheaper basses and guitars that when the fret markers are not aligned with each other, it usually means that it's less attention to detail has been spent on the instrument. But in this case, You can see that that is not the case. Everything is nicely lined up. And also the way the neck has been finished with the rosewood section of the neck, and how it's been glued to the maple section. There's no unsightly lines or gaps or glue fills or anything like that. So very, very impressed with that. In this shot, I'm trying to give you a low angle reflective shot of the paint, because the paint is another area where oftentimes on lower end instruments you'll see that the glue joints between the planks that they use to make the body are not perfectly aligned or sanded, and you will see bumps or ripples in the paint. And in this particular base, there's none of that, and you can see especially in this area here towards the back of the base here. And if I can get it clearly in the shot for you, so along this area here you can see a very nice reflection. You can see that the paint is super smooth. There's no ripples, dents, or defects in any shape, way, or form, which is really reassuring and is really nice. The pick guard, by the way, I haven't mentioned it previously, but the pick guard is also a 3-ply pick guard. It's white, black, and white, and very typical of what you would see on these type of bases. Let's take a moment and talk about the headstock. Now, the headstock design is very similar to the F-type bases. Obviously, it's slightly different because of copyright issues, but it's not ugly in any way. It's not gaudy or too stylized, which I like. I like headstocks that are a little bit subdued and don't bring too much attention to them. And this really does it very well. We have the Donner logo here. It indicates that it's the standard series, and you could see part of the hardware here. You can see part of the tuning pegs, which are very beefy, nicely chromed. There's no pitting in the chrome or any defects whatsoever. The string T here, or the string button, holds the last 2 strings down. Nice and beefy, also very solidly built. You can see that in the truss rod hole, there's no finishing, no bushing that they use. So it's just raw wood that goes into it, and that's perfectly fine. Looks very nice, nicely done. The grain on the actual headstock that you can see here is perfect. There's no knots, there's no dark spots. Very nice quality piece of wood, and the thickness of the headstock is also nice and beefy as well. So I don't foresee any issues there. Let's have a look at the back of the tuning pegs so that we can see what kind of design they've used. Here again is an area of the hardware that is very impressive to me. They've chosen to go with nice quality hardware. You can see how big and beefy they are. The gears are nice and solid. The plaques on the back of the headstock are nice and big with 4 big screws there. Everything looks to be super high quality, and again, no pitting or defects or funny weld joints or anything like that. You can see that the quality is very good. The gear ratio was very nice on these tuning pegs as well. Very smooth tuning, and initially when I played it after bringing it in from the cold, I didn't wait all that long, and I didn't have any instability in terms of tuning at all. So here's another angle of the tuning pegs so you can see the quality of the gears and how tightly the pieces have been put together. There's no sloppiness there whatsoever. So the back of the neck is maple. You can see that the grain is nice. It hasn't been finished in poly. It has a light finish on it, but it's not sticky. It's very thin. For those of you who like wood grain, you'll definitely like the feel on this neck. If you like it to be a little bit more polished, you can always sand it down with 800 grit sandpaper and maybe apply a very light coating of wax to seal it in, and that's all you really need to do. So we're looking at the neck plate here, and we can see another area where they've chosen to give it a little bit more attention to detail. There's actually a logo in the back of here, and it says Donner. The inscription says make your own music, Donner, designed by Tennessee, established in 2012, crafted in China. The quality of the actual plate is nice. It's pretty thick, nice quality screws, and it also has a little rubber gasket that goes around it. You see this on some instruments, particularly instruments made in China, and that is also handy so that if you take out the neck plate and replace it often enough, it doesn't mar the paint or cause any kind of scratching or defects, and it's an added level of protection there. All right, so here I wanted to show the fretboard in a little bit more detail because I'm really liking the type of wood that they've decided to use on the fretboard. It seems to be some kind of rosewood, and it seems very rich, very nice and dark in color. I haven't applied anything on the fretboard at all. This is straight out of the box, so you can see it's nice and dark. It's not dry at all. And sometimes you see Chinese companies using very inferior type imitation rosewood that they don't have any issues shipping nowadays because of the regulations on rosewood. Now in this particular case, I'm not quite sure what type of rosewood they're using, but it looks very nice, dark and rich, and the thickness is quite nice as well. You can see here that they haven't skimped on the thickness as well, and it looks really super nice, so I'm very happy with that. So here the inlays you can see look to be plastic. They're not trying to imitate mother of pearl or anything like that. It would have been really nice to see them use something along the lines of mother of pearl, but it's very subdued and it does the job, and I'm not knocking the inlays at all. I think they work very nice and they blend nicely into the neck. So guys, there you have it, the Donner bass, an extremely good value for the money in my opinion. I was prepared to be disappointed, but I'm not disappointed whatsoever. I would easily order another one of these basses for anyone, and I'm really enjoying playing this bass a lot. Honestly guys, for the price they're selling them for, I really don't know how they do it. I mean, honestly, just the strings that go on the instrument, if you buy a decent set of strings, and these strings are not shabby at all, you're looking at about 30 to 40 bucks for a decent set of bass strings. And they're selling this entire thing with the case and with the strap and everything else for 179 bucks. So I don't know how they do it, really, honestly. You're not gonna feel like you got ripped off with this bass. So for me, I'm giving this bass a super thumbs up. Donner's doing a great job with the basses, so I hope they keep up the quality and the quality control, because I'm just flabbergasted. So that's it for our bass edition. Hopefully you liked it. I know a lot of you are guitarists out there. Maybe you came to the channel looking for another guitar review. Don't worry, there's gonna be more guitar reviews coming your way as always, but I wanted to give the bass players out there a little bit of a little taste of, you know, what they can get for not too much money. Definitely a good idea to have a bass or two in your collection. So that's it for now, guys. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Addicted to Gear. I'm Tony, I'm addicted to gear, and I hope you will stay tuned because there's more great stuff coming your way. See you soon.